Well, welcome to the Dreamlands, everybody. Just really interesting to be back on board. I want to thank you for your patience with me regarding last week. I had a bit of a conflict in terms of probably this week, this Tuesday, a bit of a conflict getting ready for some information we're going to cover today, and really interesting too. And I want to take a moment here to recognize a comment was made back on Tuesday during the program, or probably last Thursday, from a viewer in the UK. A little bit of madness brought up. We were talking about certain things and about challenges and projects to work on, and he thought it might be interesting to take a look at the DMC 12, the DeLorean program, and just kind of sparked a little bit of a nerve in my consciousness about all of a sudden. I remember back at design staff, I worked with John DeLorean for 2 years at Chevrolet, and became part of that mission to get that program launched for John while I worked at the staff. So I just thought I'd take a peek here, and the reason I didn't go live on Tuesday, I did a little bit more research into this whole DeLorean thing, went back to some of the memory systems of what I was going through at the time at design staff, and I was at Advanced Chevrolet at the time, and John DeLorean was my general manager, and we worked on a lot of projects together. Then he started this thing called the DMC 12, the DeLorean. And during the day, we'd work, for example, in the studios from 8 till, hey, Chip, how you doing, man? Good to have you on board here. Thank you. Hope you've been well. So we'd start the day out at the Tech Center, for example, up in the Chevrolet studios at that time, and go through a normal work day during Corvettes and A-body systems and F-body programs like the Camaro and Chevelles and the like in Corvette. And after 5 o'clock, we'd run down to the Skunk Works in the basement of the technical center, start working with John on some things. He wasn't there all the time, but he assigned us to start putting this program together. So based on that conversation last week from a little bit of madness, I thought, let's go back and look at this thing, maybe do a retro visit of what this machine might look like. And back then, it's really interesting too, just a bit of a back history. Back then, the whole process, hey, great Scott, it's a DeLorean. Yeah, it sure is, DeLorean. And I think there's a bit of a story behind it too, Chip, about a conversation last week on the end of the program. Somebody brought it up, and it just sparked some memories from mine of it, having worked on that program with John at the Technical Center in Detroit at GM. Interesting set of circumstances. So all that to say that a little bit of history on this whole process is, I think, very valid. It started out, John's passion was to really compete with some of the exotics in Europe at the time, and this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, obviously. And the whole school of thought back then was really sheer geometry, very geometric, pretty straightforward materials, for example, like the Maseratis, the Ghiblis, and some of the Espadas, for example, coming out of Europe. The Lamborghini, obviously very geometric and extremely faceted. And he didn't want to really go too far with that. But the thing that really was the most, I think, the most groundbreaking conversation was during the design process was he was not a big fan of flamboyance, even though he was a very flamboyant individual. He wanted to start out, and we kept asking, for example, why don't we just do a nice, simple entry-level two-place coupe and move into an area, for example, coupe, sedan, then into some very advanced exotic machinery, for example. He didn't want to go that route. He wanted to jump right into the foray and begin to compete with the European manufacturers. So all that to say that I went back in and did a little bit of research in terms of what this vehicle really began to represent. Straightforward, nothing flashy. The only thing that was really unique about it, obviously, was some of the materials used, like the brushed aluminum surfaces, which are very difficult. Obviously, he found out in a hurry, difficult to work with. It was a kit car in essence. We didn't have a real good manufacturing distribution system, so it really became a real problem in getting all the bits and pieces to come together. In the end, that was a downfall of the whole program. But nonetheless, I thought we'd go back and look at this thing. And what I'm going to concentrate on here from memory is the fact that I put a little bit of an elevation slide here together of the present DeLoreans we see it today. Notice, pretty straightforward, very geometric, straight body line going through the process. Want a very slow fastback on this guy. Very solid split line. Of course, it had butterfly doors. And at that time, bumper geometry was extremely well regulated. So we had some extruded bumper systems up front and the same process in the rear. And the front end graphics and the rear end graphics, as you remember, very straightforward, almost very linear. Very simple dual lighting system in the rear, twin box system, and then the headlamps up front. Same way. It was just very interesting how, again, a very sedated approach to a very formal sports car system that John wanted to develop. So based on that premise, I started looking at, all right, that's the basic elevation. So I started looking at some elevation studies here, and we're going to move through them, and we'll wrap up some things near the end. But I want to really focus in on a couple of things here. when I did the revisit, I thought, one of the things we did back then, these are all new sketches, but back in that time period, there was a very strong dynamic, for example. It had a very bold cut line going through the whole process, almost like a split 50-50. And the gull wing doors was another feature. Butterflies, and again, another feature was the little access port. The glass was fixed. Access port to get to it. And I think the thing that I want to focus in on here is that line, that door geometry. There's a door cut here, it comes along parallel to ground and up into the B pillar. And very, very formal, very rigid, but I think I want to take advantage of two things here. When I put together these sketches for this session today, I looked at, let's just change the accent, for example, of being parallel to ground and just put a little bit of a downhill California rake to it and just kind of lift it uphill a little bit and get a little bit crisper with it, and then change some of the speed lines up in the B pillar and get a little faster with it. And at the same time, put a little bit of lean in this thing and add some body graphics. And again, still keep it very simple, but at the same time, have a little bit of a historical relationship to what the machine actually did. And if you remember, too, one of the things that was really interesting about the whole concept was that the point was made that it should be very easy to access and repair, etc., which was true. It did that. But I think that the real drama came from the fact that it was a very simple brushed aluminum surface, and the problem with that was you get into like front end caps that are molded and rear end fascias. No matter how hard we try to keep those surfaces consistent, if you look at the machine on the road today, there's almost like a dark charcoal up front and a dark charcoal rear, and then a normal aluminum body look or appearance through the quarter panels and into the door systems and the like. So very interesting set of circumstances. So here we go. I just want to go through a series of elevations I've done ahead of time here, and I'll walk you through some things that I thought we might be able to look at here. The current platform elevation is here. So I went back in and said, all right, what if we did this? What if we add a little bit of this to it? Let's take that same format, and again, notice we started with this little uphill run at it and get a little bit faceted back here in the fastback system, a lot more truncated in the rear, add a little bit more overhang, and then hide the bumpers a little bit to kind of clean it up a little bit. So we had a very strong diagonal line, very strong offset in the door system, a little bit of offset in the fender to door. Started there. I kind of streamed out a little bit here, a little bit of tone change, same basic process. And then notice almost every sketch looking at here, going through the process, we almost had a chisel system going through the entire front end. It's more of a shingle approach as opposed to, let me go back to this one. Notice that's a very straightforward slant and then into a body quarter up in the front quarter door seam and then into the rear quarter panel. So we want to change that a little bit and get a little more speed line to it, give it some shingle look. And then again, still having that uphill run. So the whole idea is to get that gesture to kind of run and just go from parallel to ground. 80s and those concepts, yeah, I love it. It's that same kind of up and over the top. Instead of being parallel to ground, just kind of shifting the accent, give a little more downhill lean. And the one thing I wanted to really stress here, I should have brought this up a little earlier. The one thing I really want to stress through this whole operation is to try to keep it as concise and as memorable or evolutionary as I possibly can from where we were in the 80s up into now this present generation. I noticed some time ago there's a concept DeLorean put out there by a manufacturer. I don't know if it's European based or if it's actually domestic, but it had a lot of round softness to it, and it was very organic. And it was a beautiful piece of equipment. Don't misunderstand me. But it didn't have that same retro feel that the generation from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 would have. I think it maintained some of the spirit of that initial concept that we did for John back in the 80s. And I think that's correct, Chip. Thanks for the input there. Smell the 80s in the concept. I want to keep that same freshness he had back then as a departure, but yet bring it into a little bit more of the modern genre and keep some of the systems that we had in mind there. For example, butterfly doors, a downhill seam, the buttresses right front and rear, and get rid of some of the shears of the straight solid geometry that was very prevalent back in the 80s of some of the manufacturers, like I mentioned, Maserati. Maserati was a good one. Some of the Lamborghinis obviously had the same process too, and there was a lot of Baraggio, for example. A lot of interesting manufacturers had that same process. So he kept that in the format as far as putting the process together, and as part of the identity. I can't imagine. Yeah, I agree, Chip. Thanks very much for the input there. I can't imagine a real contemporary DeLorean. Let's go back to that one that they did that I've noticed here. It's been out on the internet quite some time. It's a very modern, rounded approach, but it didn't have that same DeLorean flavor to it. So I'm not saying these are, but I definitely want to take advantage of the fact they wanted to keep the genre pretty crisp and just kind of move it along an evolutionary line here. to get it started. So these are the first two passes I did in elevation, maintaining that. Then I switched gears and went to this. It's a little bolder here. Then again, all of a sudden, just get a little more of that same process. And looking at that whole theory, let's go back to that first sketch here. This whole idea of having that door system became a bit of a design theme that I really want to bring onto are stuck in time. Yeah, they are stuck in time, Chip. They really try. You notice the one up on top. Again, now we start to get a little more bold with a chisel, that shingled front end. Still strong baseline and coming right back in and adding that door system, that strong seam going through it, and really getting this bustle back to kind of chamfer back. And a little bit more boldness to it. Then back to a little bit more of a sedate operation here, which is okay, but started, I think, moving toward that area there started to inspire some things here about, maybe that's the right format to look at here. Just keeping the very strong fast back, or in this case, for example, almost like a cam back look to it, with the same glass departure, a little bit of the entry level door loop drop system here, and then we went from that page. Let's see, let's go this way. Pardon me. Then we went from that into this. Now all of a sudden, notice a little softer here, and I don't know. I just the rounder it got, the less it felt like it had that same appeal, the original. So I tried a little bit of a venture here to kind of go back a little softer here, a little softer in the upper, and again rounding off the tail section and kept that same basic door theme, and then I brought that fender line back in and just shot it back to the razor into the rear quarter. And then I went back to this guy again. I went back to that aggressive stance of being, sheer, very crisp, but at the same time, part of that heritage. Now, notice there's a lot of downhill rake to it. This thing really kind of cranks uphill and has a statement about it. So I think I'm back to this family of forms as opposed to being rounded here. So let's go back and look at this. And then the next set, a little bolder yet. All of a sudden, things started to come together. I think the more I began to look at this thing from the point of view of keeping those two very good basic design themes in this evolution study here today was number one, the downhill rake, and number two, getting a little bit more shingle or a little bit less flat through the surfaces. This started to have a little bit of a romance to it. And again, this bustle back tail section on it, you'll see a little bit later how that plays into the formula here. Not too happy with that offset chisel up front. It's just a bit too busy for what we're after, because again, the original car was very straightforward. Something a little closer here, but still a bit too much action. But again, the surface work started to come out here. And this is kind of a nice little change of pace here into the door cut, into the seam line, and into the cut line back to the rear quarter. So I started to make some real progress here in terms of getting a little closer to the aspect that we're after. So if you're still with me, Chip, what do you think? So I'm making some headway here. You're going to be part of the whole process here, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Not an easy task, because I think all of us want to go out there and just really do something really flamboyant and extremely unique and different. But I don't think that was the idea that I had in mind here for this program today. I'm going to keep a bit of the DeLorean history, and yet bring it into the modern genre with keeping some of the same design semantics that was taking place back in the 80s, as you pointed out. So what do you think? I'll hold on here for a moment and get some feedback from you, Chip. Great to have you on board, man. I'm glad you're doing well. Let's see. So while we're waiting for that, I think there's something happening here that had a little bit of that same flavor. Again, very faceted, still very straightforward and crisp, but at the same time had a little bit more character to it, a little bit more of that, what I refer to as something that we could learn out today and say, oh, this is a natural progression to get to the DeLoreans that we're after today. So here we are. I just got to turn the page here for a bit, and let's go to the next study. So from that elevation series, I went through enough of the variations on elevation to get a bit of a format started. Then I started to say, okay, what does it look like when you go to the front three-quarter or change the view a little bit? So now I went back and started this. Now it started to take on some sense here. Notice the front end graphics. Sorry I missed it a bit. What was the question was, what do you think as far as progress goes here, Chip? Now we're going through a whole series of elevations here. And my rely on your input here and your insight. Do you think we're getting closer to that almost historical, nice, simple evolution from where we were in the 80s to this, the progress we're statement? Hey, how you doing, Shadow? Good to see you, Doctor. Thanks for coming on board here. So that was a question, Chip and Shadow. Are we getting closer to that what I refer to as that transition? Yeah, I bet it's a busy day. No, same. I can understand fully. So are we getting closer to that same basic format of, we're going to do a retrofit, but we're not going to go crazy with it and go into what I refer to as the modern genre of just being a supercar. I'd like to maintain some of that character of the DeLorean we started with back in the 80s. So what do you think? Are we making headway here, Chip and Shadow? these are the two latest elevations that we ended up with. And I don't know if it's there, but from that stage, this series here, I started to turn it around a little bit. Oh yeah, the evolution is wholly part of that AIDS vibe. So it's just yeah. Thanks very much. That's cool. Appreciate it. So now that we've got that, I went from these elevations into some very quick little studies here. What it looked like in the front 3/4. So we turned the corner here, and now we're starting to look at some of this very spirited looking downhill rake. A lot leaner, a lot not as stoic, not as what's a good term here? Not as slow or stodgy looking. It had some of the modern contemporary pieces too, but still had that character to it from the reference of the original DMC, the 12. Notice the front end graphics. That front end graphic in the original was extremely sedate, straightforward, rectangular tooth. Twin headlights, a little bit of grille, and a little shovel underneath, and that was it. Same in the rear 3/4. It didn't have that same kind of, it was just two light boxes, and that was it. Very straightforward in between the front and rear graphics, and that was it. So what I try to do is push a little bit more of that same basic, simple front end lamps, space, lamps. A little bit of spoiler underneath there, a little bit of a return kicker underneath it all. Again, that same uphill kick into that razor, and then that same basic theme line into the doors. So, and again, front 3/4 here, a little bit more aggressive. I'm not really sure about this guy. I think that gets a little bit less out of the. It's a bit more of a stretch as far as being too much of a slope, too quick. I love that grill on that one. Yeah, this one right here, Shadow. I think that one. That's the one I think. I want to keep that same front end character. Yeah, me too, Chip. Hey, Chip. And we got here. Yeah, the middle one. This guy. Yeah, I think that has a lot of character to it in terms of keeping it simple. Still DeLorean, but it doesn't push the envelope much as this does. That's a little bit more too aggressive. But I still like the fact that it has that little bit of a simple return into the splitter underneath, and then a very simple razor line coming back in that very uphill kick. So I started there, obviously, then went to another set here, went through the whole process of going to, for now, this would look like from the elevation in the rear 3/4. This is where it gets interesting. Now, looking at the whole thing about, looking at it from the point of view of where we have been, there's something very nice about, and this is the bustle back is an interesting look at it here. We maintain that same kind of drop system, very square piece. But it added a bustle to it, and then took that rectangular box lighting system and threw them up into high-level lighting in the rear end there. And I think again, look at the slope is changing here. A lot of uphill graphics. It's got a little more aggression. It starts to look like it's something that might belong in that same. Let me do this for a second. How the relationship is here, so we get this all on the same page. Look at that transition. There it is. I'm doing my best to watch it work with. Oh no! Hope it's not my end of it here. So there's the original, and there's a little bit of a transition change here with what we're looking at here to go from that elevation to that elevation, and then looking at the rear 3/4, adding a bit of a bustle back on this guy to give a little more character, especially when you get into things like this. It's a little more aggressive looking, but I think it has an awful lot to really kind of, hey, here's Lab, how you doing, man? Good to see you. It's good to see you on board there, Dave. So thank you. It's a bit of a risk, but it has that same basic character, that strong diagonal line coming through, that same body brake, same door scissor system, and then returning it back to the rear quarter, but yet not complicating life here. And I think this has a lot of aggression to it, and it still, to me, has a bit of that same DeLorean retro revisit we want to maintain. So I went from those studies into this, and then back to some front end stuff here. Look at this. Again, same basic flavor we had the other day, and it's just something nice about this. Again, keeping it nice and it looked a little bit more fluid. More aggressive, yet retains that 75. I can almost feel the fake leather. It's true. So again, going back into that elevation, and I didn't want to tip my hand here and really kind of highlight, for example, in the process, what that front end looked like. And it's sufficient to say it's very rectangular, very straightforward, very sheer, and yet had twin lights and a little bit of a splitter underneath it, and that was it. So I'm going to try to go back to that again. Notice, came down into the shingle, broke it, then returned it into that splitter, and then just kept the lamps, that same strap, put a little bit of a plan view change in it, and then really, that nose, I like that. It's interesting how this guy, to me, has a lot more character. It's a little bit busy in through here, but this gets a little bit more stately in terms of keeping that DeLorean influence of what we're after here. So that was an interesting approach, as opposed to trying to go back. Let me go back. Sorry about here, guys. I go back and forth. with a couple of these front end studies that we did here. A little bit too much fuss. Let's put these all together if we can get those lined up side by side. Is that better? There you go. There you are. It's same basic character here, but just getting a little thinner with it and a little slimmer with it, and then getting a lot more. It's just very, very clean, simple, enough for a color break. You can put a texture in this guy if you'd like, or just keep it a nice simple ribbon. Back to the shingle again, that little spike underneath it, and just changing the format underneath that splitter so it just comes forward on the vehicle. I just really felt that was a lot healthier than this. It's still a little bit too romantic. Notice the weight changes. This is a bit busy here. But this kind of sums it up a little bit. So that was an interesting approach here. So pardon me for going back and forth here, guys. I'm going to keep referring it to. So that was it. And then last but not least, came back again and did a little bit of a 3/4 run on it. Let me keep this outside. That's a good reference point here. Back to a 3/4 run again. Notice again, same uphill run, the same slope. And again, slimming up the front end, keeping that same shingle, running that through, slimming down the lamps. And coming back in and doing a little bit of a rear 3/4 graphic on it, which is really starting to pick up the same flavor of the original machine. So it has that butterfly door system to it, has that same offset through the middle, but yet has that high severe rake in it that makes the job. So let me stop there for a moment and get your input. So far so good, gang? Is this making sense? There's a lot of things to take care of here, and I don't want to really push the envelope and say, oh, this is going to be sufficient, because it's got to be more sporty, it has to be more adventuresome, a little bit more exotic. No, I don't believe it has to. I think it has to really maintain the heritage of what the DeLorean, the DMC 12 series began with. So let me just see the rounded hood. That's closely edging on the 90s there. Yeah, this guy right here. Yeah, I think you're right, Chip. I don't know. I don't think that nearly has the same aggressiveness as that does. That looks more like a DeLorean facelift to me. It might be a bit more adventuresome, but it has less of that same kind of organic shape you're referring to here. I don't think that retrofit today, if we did that same car today, I don't think we'd have that same kind of organic look to it. He wanted to maintain that sheerness and that whole possibility of maintaining the Maserati influence, the Carrabbo influence, and all the European manufacturers had at that time period. So that's, to me, is a front-end candidate. So last but not least, went back in and did this. There's a little bit more of an aggressive stance on it here. Last little 3/4 front study. Again, a lot more chisel. Going back to a vertical stance on this thing, a little bit more interesting, but still maybe a little bit too aggressive. It does not have, to me, it does not have the same essence. If I take that body form and put that front end on it, I think we've got a pretty good salesmanship here. It's a stance. A little bit of an overhead 1/3/4 front on this thing, trying to keep that slimness through the whole process and show where the plan view takes place. I think that really makes an awful lot of sense to it here. So that's where we are as far as the history goes. And I thought we'd take a look at some of these guys and maybe put a final sketch together here just to kind of get this thing started as a platform study. And let's put that away here. And I'm going to leave this guy. Let's get rid of this and let's see if we can put together a nice little format sketch with that new front end and a different stance. Let me switch gears here. Let's go back and get this guy set up here. So if I come back in there, I've got a little bit of a line study to work with here. So I'm going to come back in and just begin to pick up on some of that same. I'm going to try to work with this and then come back in with that nice little front end graphics that we talked about and put the rest of the body form together. We'll kind of pull those out as we go here. Let's kind of go back in through this. Using the ballpoint pen and just do some nice simple little warm-up sketches here. Take it through. Get that razor line to come through it. Get that shingle to work. Break that in a little bit more down, then break it. Upper. Bring it back. A little bit of return to it. That little lower kick here. Let's see. Oh, pardon me. Put that back in place. Uphill run. And bring in that, let's reverse that. There it is. There it is. Rear view mirror. Pillar. Pillar. Insert piece. Again, let's show you where that bustle back is going to take place. Right in there and kick that out just a bit. Let's put a little bit of that in place. Pardon me. Oh, there you go. There's a little bit of elevation setting. What do you think, gang? They're coming together right? Crack. Everyone was on cracking these. Always wondered why. Let's see. Let me go back and pick up something. Okay, so there was some curves with a very slight slope, but they always ended in a sharp angle. And monitor. Yeah, that's it. I always wondered why they did the windows in multiple pieces. Seemed like it would just cause problems. Yeah, it did, because it was a very simple manufacture, because the molding process at that time, Shadow, much more amenable to get things done. David Pinter, hey, during as I work, looking cool, more adventures in the recent Countach revival. Yeah, I think it's interesting, the Countach revival, that was really interesting to see that. The original Countach was extremely diminutive, very small, very, very compact, but the new one is massive. The thing is huge. So there we are. I've gone through, so we'll go back through a review here in a moment there, David, but I think it just kind of points out that we've got a pretty interesting sign. If you look at it again, I'm going to go back to look at this, the first one. Here's the elevation we started with. There's the current DeLorean. Look at the changes we made. Faster B pillar. Took the slope line, or the parallel to ground line here, opened it up to about maybe 15 degrees and changed the angle. We got a little more of that crank at it. Got lightning going through it. Brought that same camback or fastback look, but came off the upper, pushed the canopy forward a little bit, went to more of a shingle front end on this thing. Came back a little bit more an adventuresome run here to pick up this door line here, this door cut. It says put that a little bit bolder here. That's it to that. This whole idea, faster, door cut, sill, into the door again. That's what we're after. As far as that goes, we can take that same cut line and just bring that right through. That's what we're after. That body line right there was the basis of this theme. So that's what we're working with here. And interesting, let's see, Dr. Gatz says, any more questions? Unfortunately, watching at 144p is just unattainable. No problem. Hey, thanks, Kizlep. Good to see you. Have a good one. And there we are there with that body line. So let's go back and look at, let's do a little bit of a little variation on theme here. In the perspective of this guy. Let me clean the sketch up just a little bit and get a little more shadow in through here. A little more recess. Get that body line to come through. And then even at that, maybe just a little bit of cool gray. Let's see what happens here if we take this thing and put a little bit of a tone change in here. That becomes a body color graphic. Just through the door system. What does that do? There's more of a paint scheme to it. That's not bad. All of a sudden, look at that. That's kind of interesting. While I'm at it here, pardon me, just a little bit of a change there to kind of give more character to it. Pardonnez-moi. Pick up a nice little, get one of my pencils here to work. We'll be all right. Here we are. I didn't plan on doing this, so thanks for your patience, gang. Let's see what happens when we took that same process and went in here and put a little more tone in the glass. A little bit of a semi-rendering here. What does that start to do? That brings that whole graphic together. We got a lot of flashlight in here. Hope that's okay, gang. And then just do this. A little bit of a vertical spar in here. There it is. What do you think, guys? There's that elevation study here, and just want to take a look at what's happening here in terms of where we are with that same. There's the current. There's the contemporary version. We're trying to pick up just get this muscle back to working here just a little bit more. At that, I'm going to show that in just in some of the sketches we did earlier. Explains what that guy does. So that little bit of a kickback. There's a little more of some guts to it in terms of being a little more contemporary, but not really losing an awful lot of the impact that we're after here. Probably angular, yeah. Designers in the 80s only had, yeah, well, they did. Well, some of us did, and some of us did not. Chip, I was fortunate to go both camps and that thing work here. So it's going to put a little more tone back in this beauty here. A little more of a body color in there, just like a cool gray insert piece. Change of body graphics, maybe change of materials. This could be all steel brushed aluminum or very high polished aluminum, and almost like a halo. What's a hyper gray kind of look inside there, kind of metallic piece. It'd be kind of neat. Interesting. So there we are. There's a little bit of elevation study. Let's see if we go back in here and pick this thing up as we go here. And let's kind of start with a little bit, just a nice little boulder front 3/4 sketch here. That shingle in place. Drop it down, bring it back uphill. That far side fender in place. Got the rear view mirror to work a little bit here. Run that through. She has on the other side, and just start to put some really quick architecture together here, guys. What do you think? Heck yeah, Chip. Straight edges. Yeah, that's true. Straight edges rule the day, Chip. You're absolutely right. Let's go back in through here. Let's get the cowl up in place. Up the fender intake, little fender change of pace. Let's put a little bit of plan view in this thing. Get that shingle start. There it is. There's that little bit of an offset we talked about earlier, bringing that real slim looking lighting system through the processor. There it is. Let's get that far side bit in there. There's the kick. And there's the kick is there. Let's bring that through. Let's drop it. Well, I've got a lot of flashlight here. Well, that's not disturbing me, but how's that looking there, guys? Let's see. Love that front spoiler. Heck yeah, Chip. That's looking pretty good. Just kind of taking it all in here. Let's try to run that through. Some section change. You know, a lot of the flashback on this. Let's see what happens here if I kind of pull this back. Pardon me here, guys. Let's see what that does. Let's it keeps running back and forth and kind of blinking. I hope that doesn't disturb you at that end. But there's a front 3/4 side. What do you think so far, gang? Looking all right. There she is. That's not bad. So let's kind of keep putting a little bit of line weight in this thing now. A little bit of a downhill drop into the pillar. A little bit of uphill run. And that seam line and the door cut. There's a pretty good line. There's a. What do you think, guy? Is that making sense now? A little bit more of a. Is there a light going in here off this dock? We can fix that. Yeah, it kind of keeps blinking back and forth here. I don't know what's going on here, Shadow. So it seems to settle down a little bit here. So I can adjust it here on the other side. Let's see what that does. A little bit cooler. Yeah, it's this guy right here, I think. It's kind of blinking back and forth on me. So let's see what that does. Sorry for the interference here, guys, but so far so good. I mean, there's a pretty good evolution of, I think, where we want to go with this thing. I'm not really saying we're finalizing it here, but I think I'm trying to maintain today is that same basic spirit that we had in the original concept, and not get too far from it all, and really play up on the fact that yeah, this is kind of like a ADS or the Lambo. Yeah, it has that same. Let me see if I can put this in place here. I'm just going to drop it. Let's put this underneath this guy here. We're going to sneak them all in together. Put it off to one side. There you go. But again, what I really want to accomplish is not to drift too far from the overall character of this machine by going from that elevation to that elevation. A little sportier. So that's some of the same basic character, the same door cut line, a little bit more shingle to it, a little bit more downhill aggressiveness to it. But I think it has a little bit more character to it in terms of being a qualified retro piece as opposed to distinctive altogether. Hey, Starship Captain Nemo, how you doing, Doctor? Good to have you on board. Hey, very good, gang. Thank you so much, Captain Nemo. It's good to hear from you. We'll bring up to speed in a moment here. We're going through a little bit of a retro piece on this DeLorean system, and just started to finalize a little sketch here on this guy. Looking at, we finally arrived at a front end graphic that looks pretty nice. I mean, that has a lot of that same slim character to it, as I said earlier in the stream. Gang, it's a lot more. The original DMC 12 had very straightforward, sedate looking systems front and rear, very square, very rectangular, very geometric. You might want to keep that same flavor both in front 3/4, which is slimmed it down a little bit, a little more action to it. Cybertruck vibes going on. Yeah, Cybertruck vibes, you got it. And keeping it nice and slim and formatted in the other view here. So I think we've got a pretty good start at it here, guys. Well, it's good to have you on board, Shadow or Starship. How are you, man? Good to have you on board indeed. Everything going well, I hope? Let's put a little bit of this tone in here. pardon me, get this back in screen here. Good to have you on board, Demo. Nice to have you all and active here, guys. Neat. Let's do this, get this in here. A bit of the interior coming through. The ballpoint pen study has a little bit of a stance to it. I don't know, guys. What do you think? Great to see you. Yeah, nice. Thanks for stopping in, Chip. Hey, you have to head out, Chip. Meeting time. Hey, thanks, Chip, for tuning in. So much appreciated. Have a great day, Chip. Thank you. Let's see if we can have a little bit of tone in this thing here. Let's do that same thing we did with the other sketch. Just put a bit of background in this guy, a little bit more boldness to it. So there's a that's an interesting little format here. I think it's got to take on some presence here that might be some real good interest and use here. Let's go back in. Go to little wheel graphics. It's very simple. Bit of shadow. Bit of an intake here. Now, a little bit of body change here. Let's do this. Finish off the compliment here. What do you think thus far, gang? A bit of line weight change in this guy. A little bit of zip to it. That's that. Into the pillar. And that little bit of a DeLorean return. A graphic piece there. Let that go through it. Let's get these guys in place. And again, a bit of tone in the dish. to see if we can kind of manufacture something here. Grab that real quick stick here. We get it. Sorry about that. We just want to make sure we add a little bit of detail to this thing. A little turn signal information here. There, that goes there. Cool. That can go there. And it's coming together here, guys. What do you think? It's making sense? Already great to see you. Let's see. Any comments or any concerns here, guys? Any commentary about where we are with this thing? As a DeLorean, let's go back and get a little bit of that body color change in there, and let's just bring it right into here. It's just a nice little halo hypersonic gray metallic insert piece here in the door side. Got it. Just give a little more texture change. There it is. Just enough. There you go. What do you think? That's a little bit of change of pace here. A little bit of a design system change here. Let's put a little more tone in this guy too. Kind of gray out those lights. Get that down. Just get a little bit of that fender peak in here. Smooth that out just a bit. And there it is. That's a little black and white value study on what this guy might look like. So I'm going to stop there for a moment, get any feedback from you guys. What do you think, folks? Is making sense? I mean, we're really kind of pushing some very critical little details here in terms of getting it all put together as far as being a retro piece, a la DeLorean. That's really interesting how it all has a certain flavor to it. I don't want to destroy the original content, Nemo, of what this form might look like, but just keeping it nice and clean and simple. Going back to this very original, let's just do this. If I can get those guys up to go side by side here. Nope, not really. There it is. There's the original piece, DeLorean. There we are with the facelift as we kind of walked through the series of sketches we looked at earlier in the stream here, and ended up with a nice little front end graphic study. I think that really kind of captured the essence of what that front end might look like, which is this guy right here. Just kind of cover this up just a bit. There it is. That front end graphic to me had a lot of mystery to it. It just kind of follows back and finds just a little bit more freshness in the DeLorean piece itself, without getting too organic or too round or too flamboyant with it. So let me just do this. Let's get these guys sketched, organized here, and we'll bring this back into play. Let's just do this for what it's worth. Let's come back in here and just kind of frame this guy. And so there we are. That's it, gang. What do you think? Yeah, Dave Pender, yeah, front is working well. Yeah, I think the front end really is nice and clean and simple. I didn't want to get too elaborate with the fact that it was a too racy, too McLaren-ash, very simple, straightforward. That's it. I missed the big spaceship engines on the roof. Yeah. We can add that another time there, Nemo. Really cool. But I'm glad to have you on board, David, Shadow, and Captain Nemo. Great to have you on board here. I just want to stop right there to see if we can kind of pick up on a little bit more of this. Put a little bit of a line weight change in there just to kind of get that offset to work. So it's got a little bit more contemporary, maybe little return on it a la Corvette, but that's okay. It's part of that same GM heritage that I think that John started with that process, that design staff. Really interesting how it all came together. A little bit of color graphic in there, that should do it. And a little bit of a detail part back in there, just a little bit of marker light. There it is. So there we are, gang. I mean, it's a very interesting approach to this whole process of DeLorean. And again, very timely, almost it's suspended in time for a long, for a very specific reason. It was a real departure at some point in time in the automobile industry. But as I said, thanks to the gentleman from the UK last week on my Thursday stream, he brought up the fact that the DeLorean was an interesting EV study to work with. So I came back, let's do a retro piece and revisit the DeLorean as if it were being done today. Let's see, okay, no question there. Okay, good. So I think it was really a contest today of just a real examination today of just bringing, the original 80s DeLorean into maybe some sort of a streamline today. What do it look like maintaining some of the icons that the vehicle started with back in the 80s? Again, let's go back. And for Nemo's benefit here, let me see if I can run you through some of the genealogy of the sketches here, Captain Nemo. Then we'll wrap it and call it a day. Anybody, any commentary all so far? I mean, you like what you see? Are we on the right path here or not? It's up to you, gang. It's your call. I'd like to get some feedback on this thing because it looks like we kind of carry on the design. Might do a nice little finished rendering piece in this guy and get it out there and maybe take a peek at it. So here we are. We started here, straight DeLorean, straight upper, nice elevation. This is with the current geometry. The point I made there was the fact it was very stiff, very rigid, very, very geometric, and straightforward operation. So I started with that elevation study on the original DeLorean and went through a series of variations on theme where we started to put a little bit more, kept that same door opening characteristic, a little bit less of the parallel to ground, a little more uphill run to it, California rake. Went through that series of concept sketches and then went through this guy elevation and started a little bolder with this whole idea of this whole door cut, which was really part of the central part of the theme. I wondered if anyone would say anything. Yeah, let's see, I kind of do also love this design. Let's see, I missed it. Okay, this design is interesting, how it all comes together. So there's another set of elevations, going a little bolder with it. Then the next step was going a little rounder with it, but it just didn't seem to have the same character to it. I just really felt that you go back to more of the sheer geometric piece, which this guy does down below. It's not the design we ended up with, but it has the same basic character, uphill run, same door cut geometry, and put a bit more slope to it to kind of give it some character. So we went from there into this set. Not a little bolder yet, a little bit lower. Notice we pushed the upper forward just a touch and to give it more of a shingle look. It's a bit too busy here, but again, that same operation in between was nice. How we just kind of brought that same theme back, elevation study there. Then went to front 3/4, which is started this front end started to look intriguing to me. It had that same kind of simple geometry that the original 80s piece did. A little bit too flamboyant here. Not a bad elevation study, but again, just a bit too much shingle here and too much slope in it. So kind of pulled back on that just a touch. After Nemo, then went to this, some nerve 3/4 sides. This is where that bustle back came in pretty interesting. We debated about keeping that same rectangular format with the current lighting system in the 80s DMC, but it just didn't have that same kind of this generation system to it. So GT DeLorean, yeah, that's pretty cool. Nicely done, Nemo, nicely done. So a little bustle back gave a little bit more of a character to it and gave a little more guts as opposed to just straight box system in the rear quarter. So went from there and then into some front end studies. Again, that same little bit too much roundness to it here. Again, that same bustle back, bringing it up a little higher with high level lighting and some intake exhaust system underneath. A little bit too round here. Some of the character is still the same. The profile, I mean, the elevation or the quarter side looked pretty good, but the front end a little bit too round for what we're looking for here. And we're back into this guy, front end study. Again, a little bit stretched, a little more of a shingle drop to it, which is interesting, but still the front of it just did not look like it was a contemporary DeLorean. A little front end study. Trying to get that plan view to break. And from that piece right there, strung into this guy right here. It just slowed it all down, did a couple of real quick front end studies. And went from that format, which is a little bit more gaping, not quite as elegant as the original simple 80s piece was. Then went back to this guy, which kind of captured that same slim look, brought it through, changing the plan view, and brought it all together. And it's a great concept for a wingless tail. Yeah, I love it. There you go. That goes back to that. And then we finally ended up with that front 3/4 and that elevation study as the final go around for today. So there's where we are at this present time with this DeLorean little revisit. Hopefully it's been of some interest to you. It's been a lot of fun to work with. Very simple graphics. Again, I think it captured, again, pardon me for shuffling the deck here, but I do believe it brings back some of that same romance that the original piece had. Let's go so we can get them all snuck in there. Just enough. Is that going to make it? Maybe. Just enough of the, this is where we were, what we moved to, and then it looked like in the front three-quarter. It has a lot, I think it has a lot of dimension to it. And I think it maintains some of the character of the architecture of the original DeLorean. That same butterfly door, a very uphill run, and just a little bit more, less of the straightforward belt line, but a little more shingle to it, a little bit of uphill run to it. California concept or California drag to it really makes a big difference. So that's where we are today, gang. Please, any closing commentary at all from Captain Nemo? Are you good? Really like the idea of the GT Lorian. That's kind of neat. Nice. So making sense here, guys. Really appreciate the input, Shadow and David, and also Captain Nemo. Thanks for joining us today. I think we've made some headway here. I really like this guy. Hey, the Shadow can just subscribe. Well, thank you, Shadow. Very. How did I get on sub? I don't know. But it's good to have you back on board. And thank you as well, Nemo. Really appreciate it. And David, it's good to have you on board. So, no idea. So, I really appreciate the input here, guys. I think it's been a very interesting thing to keep after, I think, after a period of time. I might revisit this sometime down the road, maybe make some adjustments as we go. And if you have any feedback on this, let me know in my Discord about it. Maybe some design changes or what you'd like to see done. Additional things to work with. Terrific. So, good show. Thanks very much, Captain Nemo. It's a good show because you're involved in it. That was really a big help to have you on board today. Super. You as well, David Pinter, if you're still with us. And Shadow, thank you so much for joining us. So that'll do it for today, guys. I just want to get this thing started and bring back a lot of memories and tell some stories on this thing. I don't want to bore you to death, but that was a long process with Mr. DeLorean back at design staff many moons ago. But great memories. That guy was a phenomenal talent. John DeLorean was an extremely powerful car guy. He was really decisive, great to work with, and extremely fluid, very lucid, and understood the business. And really want to put, the only tragedy he made was he stepped over the bounds too quickly with a radical start rather than moving into a coupe start, sedan start, into an exotic machine. So, excuse me. So thanks so much for joining me today, folks. And if you have a moment, please take a look at my website at jim@drcontrast.com, or pardon me, drcontrast.com is my website. Drop me a note at my email address at jim@drcontrast.com if you want to see some things done or things I could work with you on or some ideas for shows. I'd love to look at that and pick some things up with it. And also, last but not least, it's always great to have the feedback, and so grateful for that. And again, lots of fun, nice little exploratory day today. Picking some changes here, fun to deal with, and again, last but not least, I always think it's important to lead with this and to depart with this because it's so powerful. I really sincerely mean it. Never forget to dare to remember to be great. Dare to be great because you are. Thanks, gang. Have a great day. We'll see you next Tuesday. Maybe we'll carry this one on and go to a different subject matter. So drop me a note, and again, all the very best. Thank you, gang. Take care.